Welcome to Backtalk Live. I am your host, Tom Hardiger. I have a co-host tonight. Now, the co-host tonight, it's going to be a little bit different show because, as you know, normally I talk about local government. Normally, sometimes I'll get off the beaten path and do something else. And tonight is going to be like any other night. You're welcome to call in. You're welcome to text in, any of that. But it's not going to be a typical show. I've got Alan Rutledge. Alan is one of my oldest friends. He is, in terms of politics and history and that, he's the best educated friend that I have. And he enjoys all of this stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. You call in if you have something to add or subtract, and we'll be glad to go over it with you. But for now, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the deep state. Hang on. Hey, Lee, what you doing?
My air's quit working. I'm going to call McGee Heating and Air.
Wait a minute. You got a screwdriver? You know, I know a good bit about this. I can walk you through it. Won't take but a second. Should have called McGee Heating and Air.
McGee Heating and Air. Comfort you can count on.
Welcome back to Backtalk Live. Alan Rutledge, thank you for coming.
My pleasure, Tom. Glad to be here.
We go back a long way.
We do.
Now look, I'm just going to get right to it. I'm not going to cut any jokes because we don't have time. We've got a lot of information. As you see, Alan's brought a lot of books and things. What I wanted to, what happened, Alan? We've been talking about this for 30 years, these kind of things. But now we come to this time in the history of our country, and we have Donald Trump, who ran for office saying he was going to do things differently. He was not going to be the run-of-the-mill guy. He was going to drain the swamp. He was going to, straighten out the trade deals. He was going to get us out of these wars, a lot of things like that. But his primary focus was he was going to drain the swamp. And his efforts have really caused him a lot of consternation. He's been through a 2-year investigation. They spent $35 million to try to prove that he colluded with the Russians. And when that was going nowhere, they investigated everything they could think of. And they came up dry. They went immediately into this thing about Ukraine and Joe Biden's son and all of that. So these very powerful people in the Congress and everywhere else in the world have been piling on Donald Trump. They absolutely hate the fact that he's not one of them. They call it the deep state that is after Donald Trump. What is the deep state exactly?
Well, that's a good question. The deep state, the way I define it, is a permanent substructure in our government that has been around for many, many years. It goes back at least 100 years. In fact, it even goes back before that. On a previous time, we talked a little bit about the fact that Karl Marx and the socialists wrote with Friedrich Engels, he wrote the Communist Manifesto back in 1848. He listed all these things that you have to do to make a country become a socialist or communist country. And I think, first of all, when we talk about the deep state, let's say, I think the trouble that Donald Trump is running into is he's a nationalist. He believes in America first, meaning that the nation state still exists and has its rights. We have borders, and those borders need to be protected. We have also some autonomy as a country. Our Constitution is what governs us as a people, the U.S. Constitution, and then our 50 states have their Constitution, and we have a federal system. That's what I think is troublesome to the deep state about Donald Trump. What the deep state wants is internationalism. They want a world government. They want it controlled from the top by the United Nations.
So is it not good enough for this crowd who they really do not like the Constitution? They don't like traditional America. Is it not good enough for them that for the last 50 or 60 or 100 years we have ignored the Constitution?
What's interesting about this is when the communists first came into open confrontation with the United States, they used the Constitution extensively. When the Berkeley free speech movement occurred, when the communists were basically out in the streets and protesting our country, when they were called before the Congress to identify themselves as members of the Communist Party or socialists or that type of thing, they all relied on the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, that's the right against self-incrimination. Mm-hmm. They said, if I admit that I'm a communist, it'll incriminate me. They didn't say that, obviously, but that's the inference that we can draw from that. So they used the Constitution whenever it's to their benefit. But what we're seeing now is a real change, a desire to say that the First Amendment really doesn't mean you have the right to free speech. There's a thing called hate speech, or if you say something that offends me, you don't have the right to say that anymore. You see, the Second Amendment, well, in the old days, sure, that was fine when we had the Wild West, but no, we all live in cities now, you see, and we can't have people carrying firearms other than a law enforcement agency. So now we're beginning to see the full frontal attack on the Constitution unless they want to use it. Interestingly enough, our IRS commissioner, or one of the IRS commissioners, when being investigated by the Congress for their attack on the conservative organizations in there, Lois Lerner, used the Fifth Amendment exclusively. So they still like that Fifth Amendment.
Yeah.
You know? They still like the protections it affords. They just don't like the protection it affords you or me.
Yeah.
And this is what we're running into. So if we talk about the deep state a little, let's go back in history a little bit and bring some of these people out to the forefront so that people can see their role in what they've been doing to transform our country. And again, their goal is this international thing. This has always been the goal of communists worldwide. They call it an international brotherhood of man. The international proletariat. It's the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Yeah.
And so, if we go back to 1913, President Wilson was our president back then. We had Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was his advisor, who gave strong steerage towards many of these communist principles. He helped implement the graduated income tax right out of the Communist Manifesto. That means the more you make, the more we take, the more the government takes. They implemented the Federal Reserve Bank, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by a national bank with an exclusive monopoly over interest rates. Why should we give interest rate control over to a bank? Isn't the market, our free enterprise market system, supposed to decide what interest rates are for the use of capital? We also had the direct election of senators. Now, this one's a little harder to explain, but this will tie into what the present deep staters want. The deep staters today want to do away with the Electoral College. They like the fact that Hillary Clinton got more popular votes than Donald Trump did. Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter in our system because the Electoral College is that portion of the Constitution which still represents a balance in federalism between the federal government and the states. It allows the state still to throw those votes, okay? And so they don't like that. They want to...
Well, they don't like that for this last election.
They might like it in the future.
They might like it in the future. That crowd just they want what they want, and they don't really care how they get it.
That's right.
But I wish everybody would look into this Electoral College. I wish everybody would look into that situation that we had in 1913 with those three things you mentioned is, and as you say, we can understand two of them. We can understand the income tax and the Federal Reserve, but when they allowed for the popular election of senators, that was a big deal. That took the senator up to that time. The state governments would appoint those senators.
That's correct.
So the states had representation. It used to be, Alan, when you and I were boys back in the late 1800s, it used to be that people loved their states. They felt patriotism towards their state primarily. That was primarily what they loved.
You were a citizen of the state of Georgia,
Yeah.
which was a part of the United States,
Yeah.
collectively the United
Yeah.
States, and that was the federal system. And so this direct election of senators took that away from the states and put it directly in the hands of the people. Well, along this continuum of government, from zero government over here to 100% government over here, if you stop and think about it, zero government is anarchy.
Yeah.
Nobody can live under anarchy. It's just not a stable system of government. Over here on the far left, for the audience maybe, for the far left over here, is 100% government. Well, what is 100% government? Communism, dictatorship. And maybe a little bit to the right of that is socialism, then fascism, then a constitutional republic. Now, our founding fathers wanted to give us a constitutional republic because it still protects the right of an individual, even one person. Take our jury system, for example. You can't convict somebody on just a simple majority in a jury. It takes the unanimity of the vote in the jury. So it's a protection. It's a protection against lynch mobs. Lynch mobs are an example of democracy in action. This is what's wrong with them. So what we see is this constant and steady assault on our traditional system, the way our government was set up. And then we also then had a group called the Frankfurt School, which started over in Germany. The Frankfurt School was a group of social scientists who decided that the best way that we can transform countries is by leavening the loaf. We go in there and we nest into their educational system, to their journalism departments, and to their newspapers, their opinion molding format. We go into their congresses. We go into, and we will leaven the loaf that way with everybody coordinating their efforts in an organized way to direct our country more towards these socialist and communist tendencies. And just give you a quote from Max Horkheimer. He was one of the first people to be in the Frankfurt School and come to this country and advocate these things. He said, "The revolution won't happen with guns. Rather, it will happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. We will gradually infiltrate their educational institutions and their political offices, transforming them slowly into Marxist entities, communist entities, as we move towards universal egalitarianism." Okay, it's a big mouthful, but basically all he's saying is we're going to change this country. We're going to change all these countries so that they can be all merged into this world government. Now, here's another interesting thing. About 1950s, Congressman Carroll Reese of Tennessee began to notice that all these tax-free foundations, in 1913, that's when we saw these foundations were created. Do you think they may have known that the income tax was coming? Because all these wealthy people put their money in tax-free foundations. They funded and endowed all these tax-free foundations. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, on and on and on. Okay. Now, what Carroll Reese noticed is that these foundations were supporting all these subversive movements everywhere around the country. The subversive Communist Party here, that, and radical elements. So he sent his chief investigator to go talk to these people in the foundations to find out what they're doing. A guy by the name of Norman Dodd was the chief investigator to the Reese Committee. He went and met with the head of the Ford Foundation, a guy by the name of H. Rowan Gaither. Now, he confronted Mr. Gaither and he says, "We've noticed that you're using all your money to grant to these socialist and communist causes, we'd like to know why. And here's what Rowan Gaither told him. He, quote, Mr. Dodd, all of us here at the policy-making level have had experience either in the OSS, that is the Office of Strategic Services, which you will see later, folks, is the CIA today. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, or the European Economic Administration with directives from the White House. We operate under those directives here. Would you like to know what those directives are? Dodd replying in the affirmative, Gaither continued, the substance of them, these directives, is that we shall use our grant-making power so to alter life in the United States that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. That pretty much says it all. We're going to use our money as the Tax-Free Foundation to help change life in this country. The Frankfurt School and why did they pass the federal income tax? So they could get all the money to do all this stuff. And they were going to use their money to finance it too. It's an amazing story. So what you have is this going on. We have a first attempt at world government in 1918 after World War I. And that was called the League of Nations. And the United States said, no, we don't want any part of the League of Nations. We don't want to be a part of that. So what happened is all the people who promoted the League went and formed these think tanks, these organizations all around the world. In the United States, it was called the Council on Foreign Relations.
With that, hold on. We need to take a break. We're going to take a break, and we'll come back and talk about the Council on Foreign Relations with Alan Rutledge, the smartest person I know.
Some things are just better left to the professionals. So when it's time for home improvement, make sure you call Herring Gutter and Insulation. Whether it's window replacement, gutters, insulation, or siding, Herring Gutter and Insulation can make your home look new again. Call today for a free estimate or visit us online at herringgutter.com.
Lee, all this painting is tough business. Look, I got a spot on my shirt. Yeah. Hi folks, we're at the Dairy Queen of Hartwell to give breakfast eaters a voice. So how'd you fellas like your Dairy Queen breakfast?
Oh, they're mighty fine.
Excellent. The best breakfast in town. Good breakfast.
How do you like high taxes?
I don't like them too good.
I don't like them in the local level or any other part of government.
Don't like them at all.
I don't like high taxes.
4 out of 4 breakfast eaters choose Dairy Queen food over high taxes. And Ray, how do you like Backtalk Live?
Backtalk Live.
That's the Dairy Queen.
Welcome back to Backtalk Live. I hope you're enjoying this. I know some people probably find it boring. I don't know if they do or not, but a lot of you find it very informative, and you're very interested. And I'm glad. These are things that you're not going to learn these things in school. You're not going to, in your history classes, in your political science classes, you're not going to learn this on television, big television. You're only going to learn this through people who have, like Alan, who are very, very interested in all of this. He just has a passion for learning about this stuff. And this is just a great way for you to be able to listen to what some of the things that Alan has uncovered. Maybe you'll get interested in it too. And you know, my number comes on the screen all the time. You can call me and I'll put you in touch with Alan, or I'll find out some resources for you to use yourself that Alan uses. Any way we can help. The Council on Foreign Relations.
Mm-hmm. The council was formed in the United States in about 1919 or 1920. The Rockefellers gave the Harold Pratt House as the headquarters for of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, in England, they did the same thing. They called their group the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And in Rome, they had the Club of Rome, and then they've had the Bilderberg Group. All these are groups in different parts of the world that are designed to leaven the loaf, just like the Frankfurt School does, and to change people's opinion about maybe this internationalism is something we ought to try. Maybe we ought to give up our Constitution. They don't talk about that, but that it's implied that you're going to have to give up your Constitution if you're going to go live with all the rest of the world. Well, let's talk about some of the people in the Council on Foreign Relations. There has not been an administration since Woodrow Wilson's time whose appointments to all the chief cabinet posts were not thoroughly dominated by members of the Council on Foreign Relations, including every administration. And sadly to say, even Trump has some Council on Foreign Relations people too. I think those are some of the people he's running into trouble with. And it doesn't mean that it's an ideological pact that somebody makes to be in the council. It just, they have different points of view in the council too. But the general point of view is directed towards this internationalism. And some of the interesting people who have been involved with it. Hillary Clinton gave a talk to it. She talked to the New York Council and said, well, I'm glad you're setting up an auxiliary branch down in Washington, D.C., and she slipped out that so we can get our marching orders directly from you there. And another person was Walter Cronkite, who spoke to the council at one point in time. Recently, he talked about how he was committed to the concepts of the council and what it was all for. Rockefeller himself has said, if I'm in an international, well, so be it. If all the conspiracy theorists think that I'm a bad guy, so be it. I don't care. I'm proud of it, and I'm a member of the council too. And interestingly enough, one of the things that came about in this situation with former Vice President Joe Biden was his son being involved with this Burisma company over in the Ukraine, and the boy has no real experience in the field of energy, but yet he was put on the board of directors at an incredible salary, $600,000 to $800,000 a year or more. I'm not even sure the exact amount. But then you see his father, Vice President Joe Biden, speaking in front of the Council on Foreign Relations with Richard Haas on his left and another participant on his right, bragging about the fact that he made a phone call and withheld or threatened to withhold aid appropriated or a loan appropriated by the U.S. Congress for use in the Ukraine until the prosecutor who was investigating his son's involvement in that Burisma company was fired. And he bragged about this. And yet here we give him a pass on that. The whole Congress gives him a pass on that. But they want to pressure President Trump because President Trump dares ask the question of looking into this potential for corruption over there. And so it's a double standard, and it always has been. If you're on their team, you're in. If you're not, you're out.
What is in it for the Rockefellers and all the rest in this deep state movement? What is in it for them? I mean, why are they so interested in taking my rights away and presumably their own rights away as well?
It's hard to answer that question. And the reason is because when we get into the presumption of a person's mindset, we can really go off the rails there. I don't know what motivates John D. Rockefeller or David Rockefeller or any of those people. All we can know is what they have said themselves. John D. Rockefeller or maybe it was David Rockefeller, made the statement that, no, it was John D. Rockefeller, made the statement that competition is a sin. That's an interesting comment from a guy who rose to the top in a most competitive free enterprise system and built a huge amount of wealth, but he also built up a huge monopoly, Standard Oil, but he thought that competition was a sin. In other words, he wanted cooperation. And if you begin looking at all the vertical integration he brought into that business of Standard Oil, you'll see the tendency towards monopoly and the tendency towards control. I believe it's the same thing that motivates them about socialism. Why they like socialism is because there's less competition. You see, if I'm out there and I'm running a little business, I've run a little ice cream stand or something, I've got to worry about, Dairy Queen or whoever else is going to compete with me in that business. But if I can control entry into that business through a social, in other words, the state is the only one who makes ice cream and sells ice cream. You don't have to work as hard. You don't have to worry about the quality of your product, meeting the public's test. Americans don't appreciate the fact that we have it made in the shade in this country because we've got the best system. The competition is what causes companies to rise to the top. This is how new ideas get made, brought into the forefront. This is how our lives get made better by all this technology and the things that we have around us. But the socialists don't want that. Take a look at Venezuela. It's a perfect example. Venezuela is a country that for many, many years was one of the wealthiest countries in our hemisphere. And look at it today. It's one of the poorest today. What did that? Socialism. Socialism did it because socialism doesn't allow any competition. They confiscated many of the farms, confiscated businesses and that type of thing. There's no incentive to produce in that type of situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I talk to people all the time about all of tariffs and all of these things. More businesses in America, they tend to look at it like if they're on fixed incomes and they can't buy things as cheaply from American-made manufacturing as they can from foreign-made manufacturing, because foreign-made manufacturing pays their labor nothing almost. So if you're on a fixed income, if you're a retired government worker or something like that, yeah, obviously you can buy T-shirts down at the mall a lot cheaper from China than you can USA. But if you're not on a fixed income, if you work, you want the competition because competition drives prices down.
Prices down, quality up, and it's competition is murder on the producer, but it's wonderful for the consumer.
Yeah.
And we are all consumers in this country.
Yeah.
So let's go back to this deep state again. What we have now is all these forces coming to work on the American people. We find it in the 1950s, the CIA, which was the OSS before then, began to, there was a project called Project Mockingbird in the CIA. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but
heard of it.
Mockingbird was an attempt to incorporate all news media points of reference into their orbit for supporting so that they could get the news media to write stories in favor of their government policy lines, okay? Now, the interesting thing is this. Here's a book called Betrayal at Bethesda, written by J.C. Hawkins, a gentleman I just spoke to on the phone the other day down in St. Augustine, Florida. Man went to Princeton. He's a bright man. This book is about the intertwined fates of James Forrestal, Joseph McCarthy, and John F. Kennedy, all having very negative things happen to them at Bethesda Navy Hospital. Forrestal, we think, may have been murdered there. We think Joseph McCarthy may have been murdered there. He went in for a little knee problem and ends up dying 5 days later. John F. Kennedy wasn't murdered there, obviously, but the wounds on his head that were believed to be doctored by the doctors there at Bethesda. So the interesting thing about it is he wrote this book, and he also talks about this deep state, and he mentions some people who were members of the Communist Party, and I'll just mention a few of these people. He's got 11 pages of these people listed in the appendix of his book, and he pulled this down from a compilation based on this book, which was written by Herbert Hoover, one of the past presidents of the United States. It's called America Betrayed, and it's the Hoover Institution publishes this. Hoover put this list of people, and then it got expanded by Herbert Romerstein, who wrote part of this book, The Venona Secrets, on the Soviet involvement in our country and the communist involvement in our country. Then M. Stanton Evans and Diana West all put this list together. But take a look at this. Maurice Halprin, OSS, Office of Strategic Services. Hans Hirschfeld, OSS. Aldo Ikari, OSS. Julius Joseph, OSS, Far Eastern Section, Focus on Japan. Philip Keeney, OSS. James Spire Kronthal, OSS, then CIA. Duncan Lee, OSS, Assistant to OSS Director William Donovan. Carl LaDolce, OSS, and on and on and on. I won't read all of them because it gets boring after a while. But the point is, these were people who were working in our intelligence apparatus who were members of the Communist Party. You can imagine what kind of intelligence we're getting. And frankly, that's some of the things that I think has caused President Trump to go in. Lieutenant General Flynn, it was said that he was going in to do an audit of the CIA. He's concerned about this influence the CIA's had about, they talked about weapons of mass destruction, but there were no weapons of mass destruction. Right. We end up going to a war because of a intel that's not correct, okay? And on and on and on. It's happened over and over and over. The Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba is when JFK decided he was going to fire Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, okay? Because there was some real mix-up between the two. And then later Allen Dulles ends up winning that deal.
Yeah, sure did.
So, and there's other people in here too. It's not all OSS. There are people in here like John Stewart Service, who worked in the Far East in China. He helped deliver China to the communists, help it go to Mao Zedong. John Carter Vincent, State Department, the Office of Far Eastern Affairs, also worked with John Stewart Service to deliver communist China to the communists. Here's another guy, Philip Jessup. He was a PhD, State Department Ambassador at Large, authored white paper, advanced the cause of Chinese communists over the Chinese nationals. All three of these men worked together, and what's interesting, is that later, when Nixon opened the door to China, who did he send over there? These guys. Interesting.
This is all interesting to me, people. I just could listen to Alan all the time. I'm too lazy to read all these books, but I like to listen to Alan, what he's learned from all these books. But anyway, we got 30 more minutes to listen to him, so give us a call or a text if you like. But for right now, we're going to take that half-hour break. Be right back.
Tom, I can't wait to see Gina's new store.
Me either. Lee, don't let me go overboard in here, please. Lee, she's got beautiful jewelry. She's got men's wallets.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been looking for one.
Why don't you go ahead and get that and see what happens?
Tom, you need some t-shirts, man. Simply Southern. Look at all this.
Oh, yeah, man. I think I'll get a t-shirt, Lee. I think I'll get one.
Tom, they've got totes, monogrammed, insulated and uninsulated.
Yeah, man. I got to have this one. Lee, they've even got monogrammed handbags.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. I think your wife would like this one.
Sure. Tom, they even had a pet section. Pet deodorizers, pet scarves, clothes.
Leroy, they got strutting cotton, turn rose, and southern sipping t-shirts. Well, thank you, Leroy.
Tom, she's got a line of Bible covers, Bibles, Christian books, even books for kids.
And my favorite, the King James Version. That's the one that Moses read. Leroy, they got this spirit wear, Hart County stuff, Georgia Bulldogs, some Clemson stuff, and they got these neat towels.
For all of your gift-giving needs, visit G's Southern Traditions, located at 36 North Forest Avenue in downtown Hartwell. And we can monogram almost anything.
Well, looks like you did go a little crazy, didn't you?
Frankly, my friend, I don't give a
The Hartwell Housing Authority features decent, safe, and sanitary housing for low-income families. Each of the 7 apartment complexes are located in the Hartwell city limits and feature 24-hour maintenance, landscaping, as well as 24-hour surveillance. You can choose apartments from 1 bedroom all the way up to 4 bedrooms. All apartments are periodically renovated, and stoves and refrigerators are furnished. Gas, water, sewage, and garbage pickup are also included. The Hartwell Housing Authority. Applications may be picked up daily.
Welcome back to Backtalk Live. Tom Hardigree, and this is Alan Rutledge. Alan, so grateful for you to come on and share your education with us.
Well, glad to be here and glad to talk about it. It's always a source of pent-up annoyance with me sometimes that you want to tell people about it, because if you get right back down to the problem at hand, the problem in this country is we don't have an informed electorate. We don't have people who care enough about this country anymore to want to dig in and do some reading for themselves and to dig in and find out what really is going on in the country. We can't depend on our news media anymore. This Operation Mockingbird, it doesn't mean that all the news media is compromised, but I've had to be very selective with the sources of information that I can trust. Because what you find is that the New York Times, when they call me and ask me if I'd like a subscription, I tell them no. I already get Pravda, so I don't need it anymore. I don't need it anymore from the left. Honestly, you can read in between the lines on some of those papers, but one of the sources that I found to be a very good paper is this Epoch Times, EPOCH. You can look it up on the web, but it's a very good newspaper, and it really gets to the heart of some of these issues of what's going on in the country right now. So if you want to know the facts, you can go there and depend on it.
Well, that's how I found the John Birch Society, because I was in the late 70s. I knew that I was different. I didn't go along with the crowd. I didn't just take the information that was spoon-fed to me on television and in college in particular. And I would look at, I remember in those days, U.S. News and World Report was considered the conservative option that you had. And it was ridiculous. It was just, and so I ended up, I won't go into the whole story, but getting in touch with Larry McDonald. He put me in touch with you. And I got in touch with the right information. Now, the problem is there aren't very many people that get their hands on the right information. And the people that do, their eyes are open, but they're bashful. They don't want to say anything for fear of some knothead making fun of them or something.
Well, when you have this information and you begin to introduce it, I remember when I first started talking about it, I was a buck private in the Army, and one of the captains from Atlanta, when I was up in New Jersey, invited me to a party. Well, I opened my big mouth and started wading in with all this information. And about the third party he invited me to, he told me, he says, hey, golly, we're all having just a great time, getting all liquored up and that type of thing. And then you bring out all this politics stuff and everybody wants to go home, And I said, well, simple solution is just don't invite me to the party. But the truth is somebody has to take that role of throwing a little cold water in the face of our friends.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that. I didn't like it. When I first began reading this stuff, my dad is the one who got me interested in it. And he threw it out to me, and I just thought, gosh, Dad, this stuff just sounds crazy. How can you take that concerted an effort and coordinate something as complicated as all this is? He says it's no more complicated than human greed. And that kind of resonated with me a little bit, and so what I began doing is reading, and then I got very frustrated with other people who wouldn't listen or read or at least find out for themselves. The one thing my father did with me is he told me, read about it, and if you disagree with it, fine, speak your piece. And I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to find what's wrong with it and look up the footnotes and tell me where I've been led astray. And I took several books back, read all the footnotes, and found out I got converted to that point of view. And so, I think that's all it really boils down to is people need to read. You need to read, and you need to know the sources to read. And that's the hard thing to do, because so much of what's going on out there is directing what I call the sheeple. We're pulling us all down the road towards socialism. And if you don't think like a socialist, you're that fish swimming upstream when everybody else is going downstream.
And that's the thing that I notice. And if you don't go along, you're going to be called names and all that kind of thing. And I really think that this is what Trump's problem is. He is saying things that, I'm not talking about with the people in the news and the Congress and all the rest, because some of them might know the score, but I'm talking about just everyday people. I think they have a problem because Trump says he wants to, when he talks about specific things he's going to do to drain the swamp, this is something that they've never heard, and to them it sounds so weird.
Yeah, and I think the other part is they may have a hard time believing that there is a swamp, because that picture's not been painted for them, and it's like a little piece of information. You get one piece of information, it's a mosaic after a while. If you're standing too close to that information, you can't back up and see that piece fits into another piece, and it forms a different picture than what you thought. It's like he couldn't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
You stand up next to a tree and you can't realize that you're in a beautiful forest. All you look at is the tree in front of you. So this is, I think, the problem. A person has to have an intellectual inquisitiveness about him. He's got to say, well, I'm not sure I agree with everything that's coming down the pike that's being told me. But then you have to know where to look. Where am I going to look for this type of information?
Yeah. You have to. You have to be. I think you owe it to your country to not accept what you're being fed. If I know that they get history wrong in the school books, and economics wrong in the school books, and probably a lot of other things that I don't know about. And if you accept everything and I'm not saying that the teachers are doing that intentionally, but they're 5th or 6th generation government school product themselves.
That's right.
And they hadn't probably ever looked into some of this, most of them. Some of them have.
They don't have an axe to grind, they're just swimming downstream too.
Yeah. And so that's probably. Let me ask you this, something I wanted to talk about, because this convention of states thing that not very many people know about, it's building some steam. There are some people that really want to have another, and what they're saying that we're going to introduce term limits. Term limits are very popular right now because people believe that the Congress is a bunch of crooks and we want to get rid of these crooks. So they want to do it legislatively rather than the way that they are supposed to do it, by electing good people. But the Convention of the States is very dangerous because of what?
The Convention of States is very dangerous because anything can go on at that convention. You may go in thinking that you are opening up a discussion about term limits for congressmen, which frankly won't solve the problem of the Congress. And somebody may turn around and take that convention into a completely different avenue. The study that has been done on some of the people involved, there's some fairly serious left-wingers involved in calling for a convention of the states. So the danger, and the other thing is this, if you stop and think, are term limits really going to do anything to change the Congress? I take a look at districts in Atlanta like John Lewis, or districts, like Nancy Pelosi's. Do you honestly think that if you roll Nancy Pelosi out of her job after 4 years or 8 years, that you're going to get a substantial turn in the direction of the representation in that district? What people forget is those representatives are just a reflection of the people themselves. If the people themselves are sorry you're going to get sorry representation. And this is what's happened in a lot of the big cities. They're so detached from the ongoings of the government themselves. They're detached. They don't know anything about it. They think it's somebody else's problem. And this goes completely against what Benjamin Franklin told us at the founding of this country. A lady approached him and said, "Sir, what have you given us? What kind of government?" And he looked at her and he says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. The emphasis being on you, your responsibility as a citizen. You've got the responsibility to keep this government. One of my favorite things to do, I sat down with a doctor who could not believe the second term election of Barack Obama at lunch one day, and he says, "I just can't believe the people of this country elected this guy a second time." And I said, "Well, let's kind of look into that, and I'll give you how that happened." And the waitress who came over to wait on us, I asked her, I said, she looked young, so I said, "Are you a college student?" And she says, "Yeah." And I said, "Great." I said, "Are you what are you studying?" And she says, "History." I said, "Perfect." I said, "Did you vote last Tuesday?" She said, "I sure did." And she smiled. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to ask you who you voted for, but I would like to ask you 3 questions." I said, "Can you tell me what the First Amendment to the Constitution is?" And she went, "I probably ought to know that, but no, I don't. If you'll tell me what it says, I'll interpret it." I said, "No, it's not reading comprehension." I said, "I just want to know if you know what the First Amendment is." She said, "No." I said, "What about the Second Amendment? I'll give you a hint. We hear about this all the time." And she said, I don't know that either. I should know that." It's, "What about the Fifth Amendment?" And I went, she said, "I don't know that." She said, "You're embarrassing me now." I said, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to point out something to the doctor here." And I said, "Let me ask you something. You said you voted last Tuesday, yet you don't know anything about the Constitution." I said, "You ought to go back to your college as a history major and say, I'd like a complete refund of my tuition. I'm not getting the civics. You're not getting the civics that I got in the 6th grade." And if you don't know anything about the Constitution, I said, how are you going to reconcile that congressman you voted for or the president you voted for? They all put their hand on a Bible and they swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. If you don't even know what's in the Constitution, how will you know how well they fulfilled that obligation, that oath? And she says, "That's right, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, think about it." And I said, "And sweetheart," I said, "I'm not trying to put you to shame. I'm telling you that if we went to every table in this restaurant, we'd get the same answers you just gave us." How has that happened that a country that is depending on its self-reliance of its citizens and the citizens to be the watchdogs of their government, that they've gone completely to sleep? They'd rather watch the football game. That's the problem.
You're right.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Barton. Since 1903, multiple generations of my family have contributed to the growth of HTC while serving the local community. Our vision has always been to provide cutting-edge communication and entertainment services to the surrounding area. From home security to fiber optics, HTC will continue to provide services that enrich the lives of the customers we serve. HTC, technology you need, people you can trust.
On the Train Test Range, you learn what makes our heating and cooling systems so reliable. If there's a breaking point, we'll find it. It's hard to stop a train. Really hard.
Remember, McGee Heating and Air. Comfort you can count on. It's hard to stop a train.
Welcome back to Backtalk Live. I want to thank Alan Rutledge for being here. Hey, I want to thank you all for paying attention sometimes, because sometimes you do real estate with me, because I guess you've seen the show. And I appreciate it. I just had a couple of closings this week that really help out, because I need to stay alive if I'm going to do this show. And I thank you all for doing some real estate business with me from time to time. I work for Red Clay Properties. That's old Alan Powell's outfit. We're going to get back at it. I had a text, Alan, that said, what about the Trilateral Commission?
Well, the Trilateral Commission was a group that started about the time of Jimmy Carter as president, and Zbigniew Brzezinski was a part of the Trilateral Commission, and
that's Mika Brzezinski's dad, right?
that's correct. Yes,
on MSNBC.
That's correct.
Morning Joe.
Yes, and it's also one of those groups that seeks power and influence, and has influenced American political scene again by being a think tank, that basically. Has the process of writing white papers and various other things on politics, which are designed to influence policy within the government. And what we find is, just like the Council on Foreign Relations, many of the top echelon State Department people, OSS, CIA people can also be trilateralists too. So.
Yeah. So. More text messages if you like. All right, so I want to hear more about this book, Alan, if you don't mind, unless you've got some other burning thing to talk about right now. This Freedom Betrayed. This is an interesting book because you told me about it several months ago.
Yes.
I haven't read it yet because you see how thick it is. I'm not sure I can do that, but that is an interesting. Not only the content of the book, but the story behind the book is interesting to me.
It is an interesting story. It's written by President Herbert Hoover, who was kind of, if you remember, we went through a depression.
I don't remember, but I read about it.
Well, if you read about the story, in 1929, he was still president, and we went through troubling times with the decline in the stock market and the restriction of credit, contraction of credit. Interestingly enough, that's exactly what the Federal Reserve was supposed to stop.
Yeah.
It was supposed to, instead of having these great big ups and downs in the markets and everything, it was supposed to even it all out. Well, here we had the Great Depression in 1929, which was, 16 years after the creation of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of good books written on that. But Hoover got blamed to a certain degree for the Depression.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of had a little bit of resentment towards FDR because of the way FDR treated him and everything. But he wrote this book, and his family felt that the book was so controversial in some ways because it went against the grain. It went against the popular narrative of what happened in World War II and so forth. And it's a very good book, though. So it sat on the shelf. The manuscript sat on the shelf for 50 years after his death. 50 years after he died. And finally, the family consented to the Hoover Institution publishing it, and it's a very good book. And in it is where he first lists some of these, in chapter 2 or chapter 1, I don't remember which, but he starts talking about the problem of communism in our country and the fact that we have these communists that are infiltrating our government and creating this mechanism for the deep state that we see today.
That's called Freedom Betrayed.
Freedom Betrayed, and you can get it on Amazon or any places like that. I think that's where I ordered it. But it's a very good book, and it's one that Americans ought to read, especially after you read all the stuff that the popular fare that we're fed out there.
Oh,
so
I got a text message, RC from Reed Creek. Hear, hear, what a great show. I pray we wake up and see where our country is headed.
Well, thank you for that, and I applaud his remarks because we do need to wake up. We need that cold water thrown in our face about what is going on in this country. This situation with this impeachment thing is a very, very dangerous thing. First of all, it's being run like a star chamber. A star chamber is what occurred under Henry VII in England and Charles I in England. And star chamber allows no witnesses to be, in other words, doesn't allow the defendant to go in and defend themselves. And this is what's happening with President Trump right now. It's basically a prosecutorial effort without calling a formal vote for the impeachment, because Nancy Pelosi and what's Pencilneck's name? I always forget.
Adam
Schiff. Yeah, because they didn't formulate this as a true impeachment thing, subject to the vote of the House. Now it denies the Republicans the ability to go in there and to subpoena witnesses. They can't do it. And now they've protected the whistleblower. Again, has been his name. A lot of people know who his name is anyway.
Yeah, it's all over social media.
Eric Sharmella, I believe, is what they say. But the fact of the matter is, and look at him too. He's a deep stater who worked for the CIA.
Yeah.
He was on the Obama payroll. He was a deep stater who supported Obama, and he went to Ukraine with Vice President Biden, and so he's a big supporter of them, and it's okay. But the fact of the matter is, we've gotten to the point where if a man is not allowed to be confronted by his accuser, or it can't at least know that how to defend himself, it's not right. And we're taking a dangerous turn in this country. What you'll find that this whole thing has been ginned up by the deep state, and the whole thing basically consists of the CIA and the intelligence communities writing a narrative which allowed the FBI to go and get a FISA warrant. Now, what is a FISA warrant? It stands for Foreign Intelligence Security Act, I believe is what it is. The FISA court basically allows our government to do surveillance on an American citizen if it's thought that he has connection with a foreign entity. This is what they used against Trump. But the problem with it is they created a false narrative. The narrative was funded by the Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton's money was used for this narrative to be written up, this dossier, by Fusion GPS, and then Nellie Orr and some of the others at Fusion GPS turned this information over to the FBI, and then they used it to go get a FISA warrant. The whole thing is a fabrication. The whole thing is just a gigantic fabrication. And you stop and ask yourself, here's a good example. There's one lady by the name of, Alexandra Chalupa. I don't know if that name's familiar to you or not. But Alexandra Chalupa was a Ukrainian American involved in this thing. And her involvement with this occurred almost 2 years before Mueller said this thing started up. Mueller says it starts it up in July 31st, 2016. This woman was involved in December of 2015, and she was involved with talking with Valerie Jarrett's assistants. Valerie Jarrett was the assistant to Obama, his chief of staff, and Valerie Jarrett's dad, Vernon Jarrett, is a member of the Communist Party, and Valerie's probably very sympathetic to her dad's orientation. So, you have that going on. She met with 3 of the different assistants of Valerie Jarrett for a total of about 8 meetings. And the subject matter of all of it that they talked about, she invited Isikoff and 68 journalists to come when she spoke to the Open World Society, which is part of the Library of Congress, and her whole focus was on Manafort, and specifically said that she spent time with Isikoff for at least 2 or 3 weeks before they even had these things. So all this is going on before Mueller. Mueller didn't want the investigation to look back any farther than July 31st, because that's when the dossier got in the hands of the FBI.
All right, you can't believe it. It's over.
Okay.
The hour is gone. The next time you come back, we're going to do a show called The Real Russia Collusion, okay? All right, we've already talked about it, but I've got to get a better education before we talk about it. We're going to do that. Now, next week, Patrick Gornella is going to come on. We're going to talk more about the Hartwell City Council, a few of the things that happened at the last meeting, and get his insights. Thank you for watching. I know that you were just as interested as me, and it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Alan, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Wes Bailey. Thanks to the sponsors. We will see you next week. It'll be another interesting show. Thank you.